Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome and thank you to all the viewers for joining me today in a very, very special edition of Finding Me. And I have a very, very dynamic guest. I'm going to do something different today. I'm not going to read out the biography of the guest. Rather, you will be exposed to the biography through the questions that I pose. So I'll get straight to it, and I would like to say a very special welcome, Jazakallah khair, Imam Asi, for joining me here today and for making this time, because I know you've afforded me this interview on an impromptu basis.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be on this program.
Okay, so let's get straight into it. My first question is, you are known as Imam Al-Asi. Everybody else, when they relate to particular scholars or religious scholars, it's always Sheikh. So why is it Imam Al-Asi and not Sheikh Al-Asi?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, Sayyidil Awwalina wal Akhirin, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi al-Ghurr al-Mayamin. Yes, that's a good question, and I'd like to explain it like this. First of all, there's no set hierarchy in Islam. We don't have a church in Islam with its papacy, etc., things like that. But we do have scholars. Muslims have scholars, and scholars have, let's say, different status or different elevations according to their accomplishments, their research, their dedication, etc. One of those is called Shaykh. And Shaykh, when it's used in the Islamic context, simply refers to some type of scholarly seniority. That's all it says, scholarly seniority. The word Imam has, in addition to that, a suggestion, a very strong suggestion of taking a position of responsibility. In other words, an imam simply means a leader. So and to be a leader, obviously, you need to have certain type of information. To be an Islamic leader, you have to have gone through the phase of being a shaykh.
Okay.
So you can be a shaykh and you can be an imam at the same time. There's no contradiction. Unfortunately, a lot of times the Muslim mind, because of stereotypical acquisition of information in certain traditions and cultures, someone's a shaykh, in another tradition and culture, someone's an imam. So where do we place this person? Our thinking has not developed to such a degree to know that, hey, wait a minute, there's nothing here that is irreconcilable with the other. Just like saying, you go to school, you get your bachelor's degree, and then you go to school further on, you get your PhD degree. Well, if you get your PhD degree, that doesn't conflict that you don't have a bachelor's degree.
Yes.
If you're an imam, it doesn't mean you can't be a shaykh. So that's the way you should understand it.
Okay, so now let's just go to a very tough question from that one. Imam Al-Asi is the elected imam of the Islamic Institute at Washington, D.C. That was in 1981. By 1983, the U.S. had you forcibly removed from the institute, and Imam Al-Asi still reads the Jummah khutbah and I believe the Salah on the pavement outside the Washington Center. Why did they have you forcibly removed, and what has happened subsequent to that?
Well, how much time do I have to answer that? I can write a book on that. I was thinking about writing a book because we just finished 30 years of forcefully praying outside the center, meaning that the Saudi regime, backed by the United States government, has made it impossible for us, legally and even physically, to enter into the Islamic center. And the reason for that, to go back to answer your question, is that there was an election that was held at the Islamic Center, the first election that was held. Now, mind you, the Islamic Center that we're speaking about in Washington, D.C., is something like what you may call the Cathedral Mosque. It's the main Islamic center and masjid in Washington, D.C. And there were never any elections there. The imams and the administration were imposed on the center by the diplomatic community, meaning the diplomats from Muslim countries who were stationed in Washington, D.C., would agree to a certain person being the imam there and a certain other person being his assistant and so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, the Muslim people, the grassroots type of congregational participation at the center, had no say in the administration of the center, imam or otherwise. But then came the year 1979 and 1980 and 1981, and if your memory could go back to that time period, you could recall that there were many earth-shaking events that were taking place. There was the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Yes. There was this type of upheaval in Syria. There was the assassination of Muhammad Anwar al-Sadat in Egypt. There was instability in Iraq. There was the American invasion the Soviet invasion, occupation of Afghanistan. So what happened in that climate, Muslims at the local level, the average you and me Muslim, we decided that, wait a minute here, this person who ascends the minbar every Friday, he speaks as if he's on another planet. These issues have to be addressed, and they have to be addressed from an Islamic angle and with an Islamic mind. And he was approached. I mean, the poor person, I mean poor here not in the financial sense, but in the social sense. He was approached and said, look, could you just address these issues? You're an Islamic scholar and all this. Could you just, address them from an Islamic perspective? And he said, no. Actually, he disclosed to one of the individuals who approached him, he said, let me tell you frankly, I amount to nothing but an employee of the Egyptian embassy. And I can't countermand their policies. I can't run face on, head on with their orientation and that thing. So, and finally, to make a long story short, the Muslim congregation there decided to organize and have an election and let the Muslims decide who their imam is going to be and who the administration at the Islamic Center is going to be. Subsequent to that, elections were held. Yours truly here was elected as the imam for the first time and the only time in the capital of democracy in the world, where you're supposed to go to the ballot box, you're supposed to cast your vote, you're supposed to believe in the electoral process. But no, it looks like Washington's not comfortable with Muslims electing their officials. I think what is happening in Egypt is a very amplified scenario of what happened over 30 years ago in Washington, D.C.
And what happened to Hamas in Palestine.
And what probably will happen to any serious Muslims who will go through this process of democracy and elections, and then to find out that, there are some very considerable forces in this world that don't believe in it, even though their rhetoric is at a high pitch. Mm-hmm. And they put on this veneer of a democratic and free and fair election society and all this. No, don't believe any of that. And we had to go through that experience. Anyways, go back to the Islamic Center. There was an election. Yours here was elected as the imam. There were 10 other individuals who were elected as administrators of the center in different capacities. And we were there for about almost a year and a half. After that, one Saturday morning at Fajr time, forces descended upon the center. There's a imam's residence there with my family, and we were forced out, literally by force. These were armed men, and they gave us 10 minutes to leave the residence, and we had to quickly get some of our valuables together and leave. And my wife was pregnant. I had a daughter about a year and a half old, And they took us to some place there, miles away, and they took us up to an apartment. They said, you know, you can feel relaxed now and all this. We just took a look at that and we just left, went back to the Islamic Center, and the press was there, and there was a big scene. And what happened was they closed the Saudi diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C., with connivance of the United States government, working hand in hand. They managed to close the center, lock it up. It was off limits. It was not accessible to any Muslim in the Washington, D.C. area for about 4 months. And then after that, this was Ramadan back in 1983. And it happened to be around this time, actually, about the 10th of July. That was Eid time. They, without prior notice, just opened the masjid.
And I have to stop you there. We have to go to a break. When we come back, we'll carry that forward. So we'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the second segment of Finding Me in the ITV networks. With me today is Imam Al-Asi, and before we went into the break, Imam Al-Asi was giving us the explanation of how he was, as the elected Imam of the Islamic Center at Washington, D.C., was forcibly removed. And of course, before we went into the break, Imam, you said that after 4 months they just opened up the place again.
That's right. They opened up without any prior notice, and this was very early in the morning when you go for the takbirat of the Eid. And then we entered the masjid not knowing that this was a trap. We innocently and without any questions entered the masjid, began our takbirat. As we were doing that, all of a sudden the police comes into the masjid with their shoes and their boots and their arms and everything. They arrest us and take us to jail.
For what?
At that time we didn't know. I mean, what's going on here? I mean, they handcuffed us. They took us to the jail downtown in Washington, D.C., and then the following day when we were released, they said you've been charged with 2 counts. One of them is unlawful entry into the mosque, and the second one is disturbing a religious service.
Okay.
You see how ridiculous?
Yeah.
I think they didn't have the courage to say, your crime is you were elected.
Yes.
They couldn't say that. It doesn't go down.
And that you're honest, perhaps.
Yeah.
We don't like honesty.
That's right. So anyways, we had to go to court for 4 months. These are 2 misdemeanors. And there was about 50 of us who were arrested. We had to go to court for 4 months, day in, day out. And the judge had to rule on disturbing a religious service. The judge was an honest man. He asked the Justice Department, drop this whole case. From what I heard and what I know, these are innocent people, let them go. The Justice Department, the number 3 man at that time in the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. was Rudy Giuliani.
The mayor of New York.
Later on to become the mayor of New York. He was the number 3 guy in the Justice Department, I guess in their legal department there in the branch, the legal branch. He told the judge, we want to get these guys. We're going to get them. So what did the judge do? He dropped what he had to rule on disturbing a religious service. He said, from what I know, they did not disturb any religious service. Now the jury, there were 12 jurists. They had to deliberate on whether we unlawfully entered the mosque. They went back for deliberations for about a week. They came out and said, we are guilty. We find the defendants guilty of unlawful entry into the mosque.
Now I just have a question. Since when is the house of Allah restricted? I mean, anybody should be able to enter a mosque.
Exactly. But this is Washington for you. This is the nature of the beast. This is what happens. When innocent people are doing the right thing, they get cast in the image of culprits and criminals and outlaws, and they turn the system against. I mean, anyone can see this in today's world. We may be part of those who had enough courage and enough moral fiber to speak truth to power. And some of the consequences have rebounded, and we find ourselves in the condition that we are in today, praying in the street for over 30 years right now. And it goes beyond that. The Saudi government has denied me the visa to go to Hajj or to Umrah now for 30 years. And it's like they act like mosques, they own mosques, and they own Mecca and they own Al-Madinah. It's like their personal property. So if they want someone to enter into their personal property, they say, look, you're acceptable, here's the visa or here's the go-ahead, come on in. But if they see you, let's say, as maybe an adversary or as a critic or someone who doesn't agree with them, then they say, no, we don't want you in the mosque, and we don't want you to come to Mecca or in Medina. That's the way they've been behaving since that
But
time.
then it has far more repercussions than that also, because it's not only about owning the mosque, but it's owning about what image of Islam we're going to give, what kind of Islam is going to be preached, what about Islam needs to be understood. And so they're effectively eradicating any other thought or any oppositional thought to what they're propagating. And that's why perhaps, which is the question I was going to come to, the next one is, in the start when you said the Imam is the leader and he's responsible, what kind of leadership and responsibility should be exhibited by the Imams when they take that pulpit, when they lead the Jummah khutbah? What should they be preaching? What should they be addressing the audience with them? What are the topics that should be? Because when I had a radio interview, one of the audience called in and said, our khutbahs are lullabies. So how do we then distinguish, that role and, of course, what the monopoly is trying to do?
Well, yes, the Imam has to, at the very bare minimum, the Imam has to speak to issues of justice in society. The whole message of Islam is about justice. The whole history of prophets is about justice. The whole content of scriptures is about justice. And if these types of prayer leaders, when they ascend the minbar, the pulpit, and then they begin speaking about, let's say, personal issues, or the bedroom and the bathroom, and how you perform your wudu, and which foot you enter the masjid in, which foot you exit the masjid with, and all of this, they are abandoning their responsibilities. And they may choose to do that. That's their choice. And I think the problem is more in the congregation than it is in the pulpiteer. Mm-hmm. The congregation has the responsibility to see to it that whoever is going to ascend the minbar of the Prophet has to realize that they have to speak about justice, and they have to explain the dynamics of justice. They have to expose oppression. They have to point their fingers at tyrants and despots, because these are the maintainers of injustice in the world. Mm-hmm. And if they don't do that, they are failing in their message, and they are failing in their responsibilities.
But then, Imam Al-Asi, there will be others who will say, for example, I've raised this question before when I was studying the Darul Uloom about the shuyukh in Saudi Arabia, as to why do they keep giving the same Jummah khutbahs and they do not raise these issues. And the answer I got back was that obviously if they speak out, they will be imprisoned, or they will be exiled or whatever. So rather toe the line, but underground or privately do your own work. How does then one reconcile those two narratives?
Well, the problem is no one is doing that. Even if you go by what they are saying, we're going to say something from the minbar and satisfy the powers that be. But when we're on our own, we're going to be involved in, let's say, corrective activities. Some people refer to it as underground activities. But they don't even do that. Because if you're looking at the whole picture in Saudi Arabia, or in other places similar to Saudi Arabia, there is no popular groundswell against the imposed regimes there that are basically stealing the wealth of the Muslims and making it accessible for the enemies of the Muslims to recycle that wealth in the form of bombs and fighter jets and all of this, that are raining terror and different types of warfare, drone warfare and other types, against innocent people all around the world. These are culprits. These are accessories. These meaning the regimes that are doing this, and the imams that are silent about the regimes that are doing this. All of these are culprits, and they are accessories to crimes against Muslims and crimes against humanity.
So we are complicit by silence.
Yes.
Okay, we have to go to a break, and when we come back, we're in the third segment of Finding Me on the ITV networks, where I still have very important questions for Imam Al-Asi. So we'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the final segment of Finding Me on the ITV networks. With me today, Imam Al-Asi, and I'm not going to waste much time. Imam, I'm going back straight into the question. So we are complicit by our silence, which means as Muslims, we have to speak out against oppression, especially if you're in a leadership position. Right. So now that comes to a very particular question. If you speak out, and the powers that be, or the hegemonic powers, don't like what you're saying, very often what they do is transform the message. So basically, let's look at Edward Snowden. They didn't like, the NSA and the US government didn't like what he did, so they transferred the whole focus onto his personal identity, moving away from the message. Usually that's what they do. Shoot down the messenger to try and kill the message. In your case, of course, you're also very outspoken. So what do? Shoot the message by focusing on the messenger. So we will find that people will label you. If you speak out against the Saudis, they will call you Shia. If you said something else, they will call you a Sunni. And so people, the politics of the world by these regimes is to use sectarianism and to use labels to divide the Muslims further. How do you respond to that?
Well, yeah, it's true that these people who have the resources, they have instruments of states, they're in control of the media, they churn out the propaganda that serves their own survival, which they hide behind, called national interest. It's in their nature to do that. Prophets were maligned throughout history. They said of the final prophet Muhammad, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him and his, at one time said, he's a crazy guy, Majnoon. The word in the Quran, إِنَّهُ لَمَجْنُونَ وَيَكَادُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ لَمَّا سَمِعُوا الذِّكْرَ وَيَقُولُونَ إِنَّهُ لَمَجْنُونَ وَمَا هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. At one time you say he's a kahin. He's one of these
magicians,
ecclesiastical personalities, and he's into this religious stuff. And they're saying it again right today. Another time they say he's a sahir. He's a sorcerer, a magician, or someone who comes with these deceptive
words, perhaps, or ideas.
Anyways, they threw all of these types of accusations at him, but he stuck to his principle. That's the key in all of this. He didn't, go about playing politics, saying, wait a minute here, let's see what type of middle ground I can find with these people. Might be something here in common. Or he didn't go about trying to ask for help from outside powers. He was in the Arabian Peninsula. If you could reconstruct the dynamics of that time, he was in the Arabian Peninsula. There were two superpowers in the world at that time. There was Persia on one side, Byzantium on the other, the Byzantine Empire on the other side. He could have said, wait a minute here. The idea is, to defeat these backward people in Mecca, why don't I find some type of civilized common ground between myself and these one or two of these superpowers? None of this has occurred. The issue is you have to live by your principle and not lose sight of your objective, which is justice. So these are the two guideposts. Principle here, justice in the future. And that's how it's done. When you maintain that position, eventually their accusations and their defamation, the malignment that comes from them, it's going to wear off eventually. And we never should lose sight here of the fact that, yeah, true, there are powers that work against people of principle in ancient times and in current times, but there's always the people who need this message to resound with the message, and then to become also participants in this struggle and this march towards eventual justice. If a person knows that that's what he is doing, he doesn't care what type of label comes his way. And there's going to be many of them. Some of them will stick for a time and then wear off. Others won't stick at all because they're out-and-out fabrications, and everyone knows that. And I think this should be a badge of honor for anyone who's getting these types of labels, because it proves their credibility and their worthiness. I'm not trying to hear, puff up an ego or anything, astaghfirullah, but, it's the truth by which we all should be striving for.
And I would have to agree with you on that, because a while ago when there were sub-attacks, my son said to me, he said, "Mommy, if they're attacking you, know that you're doing the right thing." So let's just stop there. We have to close this particular segment. We'll come back in the follow-up of Finding Me Part 2 with Imam Al-Asi. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.